Is the system connected? Yeah, the question is whether, just hold on 1 second. Ndlekazi, I'm going to drop you, no? I need to make a quick one.
Yeah, I'm already offside on the call, so I can hear you though.
On time, Brent. So where am I supposed to unmute so I can talk to them?
Unmuted, that should be the host.
Afternoon, Harold.
Hello?
Hi, we can hear you.
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you clearly.
Okay. Are you able to give us the presentation rights, please?
They've made you co-host, so if you got a screen to share, you can.
Okay. All right. Damien.
Denzel, do you mind if you can maybe put Cyber and Struvik as the person there, please, as I said in the email?
Sianda, there's no Cybran on the platform yet.
Oh, I hear you. Okay.
So as soon as he comes on, Funi will make him a co-host.
Okay, awesome.
Who's that now, Sianda?
A gentleman called Cybrand Struvik.
Oh, okay. Oh, Struben. All right. Okay.
No, yes, from Cyprus. I can't say so. We need him to come and connect his laptop to the invest. Okay, I should get his call.
Recording in progress.
Oh, how Tanan? You guys lay see us okay. Look straight now. Oh, okay. Okay. I'm trying Shem to make sure good umganwam we kinda what's the word? Find a way to have a
And why you stingy with food? And this is so nice. It looks fresh. Chicken roti.
Now, good afternoon, honorable members, and welcome to this meeting. Let me appreciate the time that has been set aside to the meeting by the Office of the Auditor-General. The staff is led by the Auditor-General. May I also make use of the opportunity to welcome all the chairpersons who are in the meeting, in particular, the House Chairperson from the National Council of Provinces, the Honorable Ryder. And this is the first opportunity that we've had to interact as a collective group of chairpersons from the National Assembly, as well as the National Council of Provinces in the 7th Parliament, to get the audit outcomes, the consolidated PFMA audit outcomes as presented by the Auditor-General, Ms. Maluleke. May I, before we start with the briefing, appreciate the time as well as the consistency on the part of the Office of the Auditor-General to regularly interact with Parliament and to take Parliament into the confidence of her office as matters arise. And we look forward in continuing this tradition that we have established over the last few years with your previous predecessor, the late Auditor-General Makwetu, as well as the former Auditor-General Nombembe. Thank you very much for all the support that you are providing to the committees. This is a high-level briefing that the Auditor-General will give. And it is envisaged that after this briefing, the individual committees of the National Assembly, as well as the National Council of Provinces, will continue their interaction with the Office of the Auditor-General. The meeting is being streamed online. It's also on YouTube, where, of course, there's a lot of interest to see what the state of finances are as far as the different government departments is concerned. May I then, without any further ado, hand over to the Auditor-General, who will take us through the presentation, and then thereafter we'll just have brief comments and remarks to be made by members, keeping in mind that the individual audit outcomes per department will go to the different portfolio and select committees. I also see the House Chairperson Gadebe on the platform, as well as the programming whip from the National Assembly. Welcome, and all protocol observed for the others that I can't now catch the fleeting eye of. But over to you, Auditor-General. Thank you very much. I think we must just unmute. We can't hear the Auditor-General. May I just ask the support staff in Parliament to make contact with the staff of the Auditor-General, because at the moment she's not audible. Can we just sort that technical glitch out, please?
The work of oversight, especially through the different committees. The report sets out some very key themes which also are informed by the risks we've identified, as well as the recommendations we are making that we believe are relevant to all the leaders that have taken up responsibilities in the 7th administration as well as the 7th Parliament. The report which we're tabling today is available online, and I would urge everyone to read it because it does have a wealth of information that is relevant for different players. As you know, Honourable Chairs, we have a constitutional mandate to serve as the independent external auditors of the public sector. We conduct our independent audits right across every single public institution every single year. Section 20 of the Public Audit Act specifically provides that we have to conduct our audits and pronounce on the credibility of financial statements, on the usefulness and reliability of performance information, being the service delivery report, as well as give a sense of whether or not, in the course of deploying the public funds entrusted in their hands, public officials and public servants have obeyed the rule of law. A clean audit is then what we afford to an entity or a department that has had no findings on compliance and has published credible financial statements as well as a useful and reliable performance report. That's what a clean audit is. There are other categories of audit findings, and I'll talk about those in a minute. Each and every report gives that sense, what the audit outcome is. We also, in every report, give a sense of what the internal controls are like in that environment, and we indicate whether we've identified material irregularities. The audit mandate and the reporting responsibilities that we have afford us a very unique perspective across all of government. We are able to cross institutional boundaries and look across sectors, but also look across the different spheres. And we aim to use this unique advantage of being an independent, credible source of information that very few other players have to equip those that have got particular responsibilities to conduct their work and perform on their mandate even more effectively. As you know, we have a Culture Shift 2030 strategy, which informs a lot of the work that we do. Still founded in our constitutional mandate, we have stretched ourselves to really aim to assist those that run public institutions as well as those that oversee them through insights and recommendations that can help every single public institution move towards better performance, improved accountability processes and mechanisms, improved transparency, but also improved institutional integrity. Because the reality is, every single public institution is entrusted with public resources, and a budget is allocated, and that budget is followed by particular performance objectives. And as a consequence, we ought not to be worried only about debits and credits. We've got to be equally worried about how the performance is being attained, how the objectives that were set and the expectations that inform the budget, how those are being met. And so through the work of Team AGSA, we aim to give insights to everyone that has responsibilities in running and overseeing government, with information on how they can shift their public institutions towards better performance, accountability, transparency, and institutional integrity. This particular year, we've gone beyond the debits and credits. We've gone to visit different projects, different programs. We've gone to see schools. We went to visit a total of 90 schools across the country. And here we were seized with looking at how they are rolling out the school nutrition program, the scholar transport program, how they are rolling out the curricula, how they are ensuring that teachers are qualified to conduct the work required to pass on key knowledge to learners. We went to visit different healthcare facilities. We looked at the condition of their infrastructure. We looked at the progress being made in attaining the ideal clinic status. We looked at the ideal clinic, the ideal hospitals program, and assessed how that's going. And all of this was not to mesmerize anyone with photographs and insights, but really to try and assist those that run public institutions with a clear line of sight of how they connect the audit findings and recommendations to the management practices that will help them achieve that which they've been tasked with achieving. The work that we've done this time around has also seen us go and visit different projects across the country, which I'll talk about in a minute. All of it is really about ensuring that we close the gap between what people see as audit stuff and what people see as service delivery. It is all the same process. One's got to look at it not as a fragmented process, but through an integrated lens that connects the dot between management practices that seek to deliver services efficiently and effectively as required by Section 195 of the Constitution, as well as the practices that make for good discipline from a financial management point of view, good discipline in terms of transparency and accountability. The insights that we've generated has been the subject of debate and engagement through the ecosystem of accountability, which I know is a diagram that's well known to the honorable chairs, because we've been interacting with yourselves in your respective committees, talking a lot about the ecosystem of accountability. What we aim to do is shape our different conversations with each and every one of those role players so that we give you insight and recommendations that are relevant to your work and then that can help you do your work even better. Allow me now to get to the audit outcomes. The headline is that indeed there has been an improvement in audit outcomes throughout the course of the 6th administration. As the 7th administration begins its tenure, they have a good base from which to build. We've seen over the last 5 years improvements in audit outcomes right across the system, whether you're talking departments or entities or even legislators which operate on the basis of FAMPLA rather than PFMA. We've seen improvements everywhere. Even the TVET colleges, we've seen improvement over the last 5 years. What that tells us is that the attention to these critical things has been much, much improved over the last 5 years. And as an outcome, we can celebrate and acknowledge the achievements of the accounting officers, the accounting authorities, the executive authorities, internal auditors, and audit committees on how they've performed from an audit outcomes point of view. It is a good base on which we can build. At the top of the slide, you'll see that we highlight the outcomes for the year ended 2019, which was the first year of the last year of the 5th administration and marked the base on which the 6th administration began its tenure. The next line sets out the 2023 outcomes, which is the comparative prior year numbers. And I want to focus on what we've called the 2024 outcomes. You'll see that in the middle of the graph or the middle of the page, we talk about the 2023-2024 outcomes for 415 auditees. At the time that we began our analysis, which was about mid-October, there were a few audits that we had not yet completed. We have since completed many of those audits, and so I would like to draw your attention to the last but one line on the slide, which is really the updated set of outcomes, just to give you a sense of where we've landed as we have gone about completing the audits that were not yet completed in the middle of September. Let me start with highlighting the outcomes from a clean audit point of view, reminding the Honourable Chairs that a clean audit is the designation allocated to an auditee that has got credible financial statements, that has got a useful and reliable performance report, and has had no material non-compliance with key laws and regulations that relate to financial and performance management. 144 clean audits for this particular audit cycle, making up a good 35% of the audit base. Interestingly, there are 65 auditees that have maintained this clean audit outcome over the last 5 years. What that tells us is that there are a number of institutions across the country that have mastered the art of remaining in the clean audit zone. They've mastered the key disciplines that make for good financial management, for good performance management and reporting, as well as for complying with the rule of law. So they tell us and demonstrate for all of us that the things that the Audit Office insists upon, the things that the PFMA insists upon, and importantly, the things that we all deem to be important around how public institutions operate, they are attainable. They're not just desirable, they are indeed attainable, and one can maintain that status.
Adrian, sorry.
35% of these clean audits look after 13% of the expenditure budget. So that tells you that the majority of the clean audits are those that are smaller entities and departments. I'll come back to that in a moment.
Yes, Honourable Dunjwa, Auditor-General, can you just hold there, please?
Honourable Frolic is speaking. Emma, is there a sound issue?
No, sorry to disturb the age. We don't see the presentation, we only see
the slides are not showing AG.
the slides.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you. The slides are not showing AG. Can your office just attend to that, please?
Yes.
The slides are not being flighted.
Okay. Honourable Chairs, there is an internet issue countrywide which is making life a little bit difficult, but my office will ensure that those slides are visible. And we'll certainly ensure that we email the slides to you as well. If I may just continue just to highlight the story about the unqualified audit opinions. The Honourable Chairs may recall that when we conducted the inductions as the 7th Parliament began its tenure, we were at pains to highlight that 20 plus years since the PFMA came into place, 30 years since the dawn of our democracy, it was, yes, important to have jumped the hurdle of having the debits and credits right. However, that was never going to be the full story for what is required for public institutions. The debits and credit are one step, an important step, yes, but just one step of a few. The unqualified with findings, that yellow category, it relates to auditees, departments, and public entities that are able to put together their debits and credits, which, as I say, is an important first step. And if you look at the 42% and the 35%, 42% for unqualified and 35% for clean audits, you're really looking at a PFMA cycle that can deliver a good 77% of auditees that can publish credible financial statements. And that is a good base. However, it is certainly not enough. And I'll explain why I say this. First of all, those in the unqualified zone, far too many of them submit some financial statements of poor quality when we begin our audit. And then they rely on the audit process to correct their misstatements. That's all good and well, but it does highlight a risk that financial management practices are not yet stable. And of course, in a world that's becoming more and more unpredictable and more complex, when there is a crisis or a change in the environment during the course of the financial year, if there isn't a discipline of producing quality financial statements on a regular basis, the ability to change course, to make the type of decisions that those who manage institutions must make on a regular basis, the ability to do so is compromised because you don't have the information you require. The ones in this yellow zone, I want to highlight, the outcome is undesirable because financial statements are fine, but financial management practices are weak. And also compliance is a problem. And the ability to report faithfully on performance is compromised. So it is absolutely crucial that the ones in the yellow zone be encouraged to move to the clean audit zone. Some of them, far too many of them, are actually too comfortable in that category. I say this because you'll see that there are 82 of them in that yellow block that have been stagnant in this category, been in this category for the last 5 years, meaning that there's a relative comfort to being unqualified with findings. And so they tend to trivialize the need to move towards the green zone. Amongst those 82, there are good 36 that have one issue standing between them and a clean audit, which then tells us that it is about a posture and a decision that needs to change around a commitment towards clean audits. There are good 26 entities in the higher education and training portfolio, and I say this because I'm sure the Honourable Chair is listening carefully. In that portfolio, there are 26 entities which fail the audit test and are denied a clean audit simply because they don't submit credible financial statements when the audit begins. And so we've got to get them really moving towards the clean zone. It is possible. It's about a change in posture and insisting that these disciplines be in place. The qualified audit opinions are the ones where you've got the purple zone. You'll see that there are 67 audits in the purple zone. Many of those would be departments in the provinces, especially the departments of health, of education. You'll see a few in the social development sphere, as well as a number in public work. Many of the audits in the qualified zone tend to be audits with big budgets in their hands, and they often struggle with accounting for expenditure, which is quite important because one's got to maintain a proper record of how you're spending money. It's not that complex. It's about discipline. Many of them also struggle with reporting on their fixed assets. This is now their property, plant, and equipment. This is important because have not yet built the systems, the processes, the disciplines that help them understand where their assets, what assets they have in their control, what condition those assets are. And quite often, if you don't know those things, it means you're probably not even maintaining them. In our audit tests, we've seen that the discipline of maintaining existing assets and infrastructure are quite weak. And the audit test on financial statements often highlights this risk when we qualify on financial information. So indeed, the stuff that auditors worry about does translate to the lived reality of citizens. When you've got a qualification on property, plant, and equipment, it's important to recognize that that tells you that you're not able to look after the assets that you do have. There are a few audits with adverse opinions and a few with disclaimers of audit opinions. And as the Honourable Chairs know, the disclaimers of audit opinions are those that are the very worst audit outcomes that can be attained. We ought to push back on it. But if you look at where the sixth administration began with 28 disclaimers to now be sitting with only 5 completed, there are a number of audits that are not yet completed, and I'll talk about those in a minute. If we extrapolate where these audits are, we think that the end number for disclaimers will be 13, which means that there have been significant improvements in the number of disclaimers that are sitting in PFMA. On the outstanding audits, I do have a slide that I'll talk to in a moment, but on the whole, I do want to register that the audit outcomes have improved, and indeed, this is a good base that we can build on as we aim to realize our ambition of capable, ethical, and developmental state institutions across South Africa. The next slide, Honourable Chairs, which I won't spend too much time on, highlights the extent of the outstanding audits, and we've denoted there how long their audit outcomes have been outstanding. First of all, on the top left corner are audits that were delayed for one reason or another. We've subsequently completed the majority of those audits, and so those audits have been completed and can now be the subject of oversight engagements in Parliament. What I do want to highlight is the corner on the bottom left as well as the items on the right. There are far too many entities that get away with not submitting their financial statements year after year. Yes, the SAA group has had its own difficulties and been through business rescue, so they're only catching up with the submission of their financial statements now. And then you'll know that the Denel group has had its own difficulties as well. There are a few I want to highlight. The Northwest Transport Investment Group is a group that has not submitted financial statements for the last 5 years. And so that needs the constant attention, the decisive action by those in oversight. We've also got in this group the Post Office and the National Student Financial Aid Scheme, which has been struggling to submit financial statements on time for a number of years now. They've subsequently, in the last few months, submitted the financial statements, and now we are completing their audits. I flag these because when we put that number of outstanding, it's easy to gloss over it, but the fact that audits are outstanding does point to significant weaknesses from an accountability point of view. The ones on the right-hand side of the slide are those where the submission of financial statements tends to be late. And it's fine. Once in a while, you can have a new entity, such as the Border Management Authority, submitting financial statements late because they are in transition. That you can understand. But if you have entities, especially such as PMTE, that don't submit financial statements on time, one's got to ask some serious questions about that. I want to draw your attention, Chairs, to the Unemployment Insurance Fund, which has for many years now not submitted financials on time. And so it misses the accountability processes within Parliament. UIF, for the last 5 years, has not submitted financial statements on time, and they have a qualified audit opinion. And if you think about the significance of the amount of money that flows through the fund and the significance of the role they ought to play in our socio-economic framework, it is crucial that oversight be seized with this matter of UIF escaping oversight and accountability. For a full account of all of the audits that are outstanding and those that are delayed and those that don't submit, we do have a section in our report that deals with all of those. I come now to the audit outcomes of the high impact auditees. We have stripped out the auditees that are significant in terms of the budget that they manage, but also significant in terms of their service delivery imperative. So we highlighted a number of departments and entities, including state entities, that are responsible for the delivery of healthcare services, education, skills development and employment, human settlements, infrastructure, transport, safety and security, water and sanitation, energy, environmental sustainability, as well as financial sustainability. Together, these high-impact auditees account for 77% of the 2 trillion rand expenditure budget. So these are the big ticket items from a service delivery point of view, but also in terms of the budget that they look after. A cursory glance on the 2 bars at the top of the page will show you that indeed the high-impact auditees lag behind the improvement trend that we've seen. So if we're wanting to drive impact in terms of improved transparency, accountability, performance across government, we've got to worry about these big impact, high impact auditees. The ones that have got clean audits, and you do have a few, tell us indeed and show us indeed that it is possible, even amongst the more complex and larger departments, to attain clean audits. The majority of the high-impact auditees sit in the unqualified space, and I've already articulated why this space is undesirable. A large number of them, especially the provincial departments of health and education, sit in the qualified space. And the honourable chairs will see that there are a few that are disclaimed or adverse. There are the one adverse for this year of the high-impact auditees is the Road Accident Fund. And I'd like to also point out the disclaimers of audit opinion being the Compensation Fund as well as CITA. Both of these have got disclaimers of audit opinion, and both of these are important institutions in terms of delivering a capable and performing government. The Compensation Fund for the last 12 years has had a disclaimer of audit opinion. Every single year, it manages a significant budget made up of contributions from employers. This past year, 11 billion rand went through the Compensation Fund. And the question has got to be, what will it take to get the Compensation Fund properly attended to in terms of moving it out of this space where accountability, transparency, and oversight and good governance are clearly being ignored? Fortunately, we can report that the high-impact auditees are improving. However, they are lagging behind the trend. The next 2 slides, I won't spend too much time on, honourable chairs. Safe to say that the quality of financials that are being submitted to us still needs attention. So although audit outcomes have improved, there are far too many instances where we can see that financial management practices are not yet sound. And the good thing is that the improvements tell us of what's possible. The benefit of having had a stable financial reporting framework that has not changed for too long, the benefit of having had stable finance management units in those institutions, as well as the benefit of having internal audit and audit committees actually fulfilling their duties, we're seeing an improvement. What we need to do is get more and more of that happening across the board. The next slide sets out the outcomes in terms of the service delivery reporting. We've seen some improvement in service delivery reporting for PFMA over the last 5 years, and much of the credit goes to the role played by the DPME as well as the Office of the Premier. And also some credit goes to the leaders of different sectors, particularly in health, as well as education and human settlements, where there's been attention to ensuring that there is a journey of improving the indicators, the performance indicators, and clarifying the targets that should form part of the annual performance plans and annual performance reports of the different departments. There is still much more to be done. And especially if we look at where we are now, where the 7th administration is thinking carefully about their 5-year plan, it's going to be crucial that we don't wait too long to get the key practices that make for good performance management properly instilled. We've seen an improvement over the course of the 6th administration. We are highlighting the urgency with which these disciplines ought to be instilled as the 7th administration begins its tenure. Things like excluding key performance indicators from the annual performance report. Those disciplines have got to be attended to. Things like over-relying on manual systems, things like not investing in the skills and disciplines that make for proper planning, monitoring, evaluation, and reporting on performance. Those have got to be attended to. The tendency of people to want to deal with performance off the books, away from the public-facing annual performance report, that has got to be dealt with. The reason we say this is that far too many accounting officers, instead of investing in correcting their problems around skills or information systems or just basic management disciplines, they choose to rather take indicators out of their performance report. And of course, that compromises transparency, and it does weaken the ability of yourselves as oversight to see how budgets are being spent, to see how the things you've agreed to as the strat plans, in the strat plans, are being actually implemented. It does also compromise the ability of oversight to report to citizens on how their needs are being met. The next area of our work deals with the procurement processes. I will just highlight from a high level here that the disciplines on procurement management, supply chain management, contract management, those remain weak. The same issues that we've reported on for a number of years prevail. We see that one of the highest areas of non-compliance relates to quality of submissions of financial statements, but the majority of compliance findings relate to managing procurement, making sure that the course of deploying public resources through acquiring either services or goods, that those processes are compliant with the procurement prescripts. What we see all too often is that there isn't enough attention and posture that insists on compliance with the rule of law. And so for as long as that prevails, there'll be leakage in the system, because what happens is that the goods and services being procured are not being procured in a manner that's fair, that's transparent, that provides equitable access to opportunities, and in a manner that does drive cost effectiveness. And as a result, far too many government entities end up overpaying for goods that they could get much cheaper on the market. They end up paying suppliers and contractors that don't deliver or deliver poor quality work. And of course, that causes much greater leakage. There is some concern about the extent of the different legislations and prescripts and regulations that deal with procurement that need to be changed, and that may well be true. What we have been observing over many years is that at the point of procurement, the skills, the information systems, and the shared disciplines remain inadequate. Which then brings me to the first area of risk that we are presenting for the attention of the 7th Administration and the 7th Parliament. As we think about where we're going as a country and wanting to ensure that we use the resources we have much more efficiently in pursuit of our ambitions, we've got to worry about these risks. The first one is about weaknesses in procurement and contract management. We're still seeing very high instances of non-compliance, which leads to high levels of irregular expenditure. And as I said, often people want to trivialize these things. Fortunately, the MI process, which I'll come to in a moment, has helped us link non-compliance with financial loss. And so we can, in many instances, debunk any myth that says that non-compliance is just one of those things we can ignore. We really cannot ignore it. We've got to insist on compliance with the rule of law. We've got to insist on prudent financial management. In spite of the public service regulations providing that public servants ought not to do business with the state, we're finding that there are still instances where that happens. There have been improvements over time, but it's still happening. The next area of risk we'd like to point out, Honourable Chairs, is in the delivery of infrastructure. The delivery of basic services requires proper, well-maintained infrastructure. The growth of our economy is being is going to be underpinned by more investment in infrastructure as we go forward. So we believe that it is timely for the Audit Office to continue to focus on this area of infrastructure delivery, but also on maintenance of existing infrastructure. We have gone to visit a total of 143 projects across the country. And we have looked at them in terms of assessing whether their planning disciplines are appropriate, whether there are weaknesses as they implement projects, whether the management of existing projects is going well, and even the disciplines that make for proper commissioning of projects that have already been invested in. We have found problems in each of those areas. In at least 86% of the auditees where we visited projects, we found problems. And those problems relate to poor maintenance of existing infrastructure. They relate to project delays. In 64% of the projects were delayed. On average, of the projects we looked at, there were delays that amounted to about 34 months relative to what was planned and promised and what was ultimately delivered. And we also looked at the quality of the infrastructure work, the construction work that had been delivered, and we found problems there. And here we found that consultants and even employees of government departments were signing off for payment where projects were not at the right quality or at the right level of completion. And we also found instances where assets are invested in and they are not being brought into use. So we are raising these key risks in the belief that if they are appropriately attended to, the benefits of investing in infrastructure over the coming years will flow much better. The multiplier effect into the economy that should follow big investment in infrastructure will flow if we attend to these issues. The root causes to these problems relate to skill. Yes, this is true. In many implementing sites, there are far too many people that don't have the skills that are relevant for what they're supposed to be doing. The disciplines of ensuring that we don't pay for things we've not received, which is not so much a skill thing, but more a discipline issue. We find that that still is weak, and it results in leakage from the system. We've also found the same problems we've raised before around coordination, especially across the spheres of government, where you'll have an infrastructure program, either by a provincial or a national department, let's say, of human settlements, and houses are built, but then the infrastructure that should support it, whether for electricity or water or sanitation services or even roads, that infrastructure is not in place. And so the project cannot now be handed over to the intended beneficiaries, and people can't benefit from what's been invested in. And often that infrastructure gets vandalized because it's not being used appropriately, which then increases the risk of having to spend more money, either safeguarding and then also refurbishing that which has been vandalized. So we would invite the honourable chairs and all that have responsibilities in the 7th administration to really be seized with this area. Another area of risk that we're pointing out is about the IT function of government. We're finding that over time, there hasn't been adequate attention to strengthening the IT function of government. How software licenses are procured, how IT projects are being run, how access controls are being firmed up, how in the midst of growing threats to cybersecurity, especially amongst governments, how that is not being attended to. We are continuing to raise issues even about the lack of integration of government databases, which does influence the efficiency of spend. The honourable chairs may recall that a few years ago, in the midst of the COVID emergency, we conducted real-time audits. And my office was able to share with government and with Parliament the key risks and the problems that the fragmented databases cause in terms of dealing with different programs, whether it was about access to social relief grants and the like. About a year ago, we also shared with Parliament the work we had done in the higher education and training sector, where we could show the problems of not integrating the execution of different programs and not using IT services to ensure that you don't pay for people who shouldn't be getting particular benefits, and we're not denying other people the benefits that should accrue to them. So those weaknesses prevail, and we're still seeing that there needs to be much greater attention to the skill set in IT, to the infrastructure that's there that needs to be modernized, to the integration of databases, we're seeing that we need to get better at managing the contractors that we appoint, the third parties, ensure that we get the best quality of spend and the benefits associated with our investment are realized. Some of the things we see would be such as at the Department of Labor, paying over 200 million rand for software licenses is not using. Those are key disciplines that should be pushed, that should be strengthened so that quality of spend does increase. Coming to quality of spend, I'm highlighting yet another risk for the attention of the 7th Parliament and the 7th Administration, which is about improving how public finances are being managed so that we do get better prudence in how resources are being deployed. We're still seeing far too many instances of poor payment practices where we pay for things we don't receive, or we overpay for the things we do receive, and we end up incurring fruitless and wasteful expenditure. We end up overspending on our budgets. So we're raising the attention of Parliament to these basic fundamental management practices that need to be strengthened, especially in a space where we are in, where low economic growth prevails and there is increased pressure on the fiscus. It's going to be absolutely crucial that we push back on any tolerance for poor payment practices. Some of the examples in our report that you'll read about would be at the energy and water sector, which spends 75 million rand paying for someone to deliver training to 700 learners. Now that training was not delivered and yet the payment was made. Subsequent to it, we've raised the issue because, as you know, the audit can only happen once there's been expenditure. And having raised the issue, there is now some work being done to try and recover money that's been lost. Some of the instances we see is where 30 million rand was paid by the Private Security Industry Regulatory Authority, CIRA. They paid 30 million rand for training that was simply not conducted. When we raised the matter, they then contracted once again with the service provider, got them to now subsequently conduct that training somewhat quickly. It's these payment disciplines, these financial management disciplines that need to be strengthened if we are going to get more from the money we do have. We are also raising that there is deteriorating financial health. There are a number of departments, especially those in the sector of education and the sector of health, where the financial health has been deteriorating for a number of years. And as a consequence, there are cash flow deficits at the end of the year, cash shortfalls. So in simple terms, there is spending much more than what was going to be received as a budget. The cash available in the system is being spent, the expenditure is higher than the cash available. And what then happens is that creditors suffer, because then that department has to wait for the forthcoming year's budget to pay for current year expenses. So creditors almost have to wait a lot longer to get the money out. And then it just becomes a spiral that the department struggles to get out of. We are raising some concerns still on the growing claims against government, in particular the area of the medical negligence claims. And whilst the number has now reduced to 64 billion rand across the country from the 75 billion that we reported on last year, we are still raising concern that the reduction comes not from a big change in the control environment or a big change in the reduction of instances where claims may arise, but rather from having cleaned up the databases, which is important and is worthwhile. However, the key management practices that have to make for reducing this particular risk and this negative impact on patients, those practices still need attention. And then another area of risk that we're flagging from a quality of spend point of view is about the guarantees being given to state-owned entities that are not performing. Another area of risk is about the lack of accountability and consequences. Put simply, we're still seeing that irregular expenditure goes unattended. So as you know, the Honourable Chairs, when there's a non-compliance that's identified and reported on, the law provides that the accounting officer must act in accordance with the framework that governs irregular expenditure. They must investigate the issue, they must either seek condonement, they must discipline, they must seek recovery if that's necessary, or even seek a write-off. The problem is that when they don't do that year on year, the balance grows because they don't write off the irregular expenditure. And what that tells us, the stickiness of this big irregular balance, is that the culture of tolerating non-compliance prevails. And as I said earlier, we've got to push back on this culture. We've got to put in place the key disciplines that prevent problems. But importantly, once problems are detected, we've got to act swiftly so that we change the culture. And people know that once there's been a transgression, there will be action. I'm coming towards the end of my presentation, Honourable Chairs, but I dare not close without highlighting a key message that I know will be the subject of our engagement. Because every time we provide our reports, the question will come, AG, we gave you powers, what have you done with them? At the end of the 5th Parliament, there was a move to change the law, and indeed that move was successful. The Public Audit Act was amended, effective from the 1st of April 2019. And over the last 5 years, we've been implementing this new set of powers. The powers do not provide for us to put anybody in jail. The powers also don't provide for us to discipline anybody. The powers are a complementary mechanism for us to follow up on how our audit reports and our recommendations are being dealt with. The powers relate to what's called a material irregularity. And what that is that if we find a non-compliance, a breach of fiduciary duty, an instance of fraud or theft that we can link to either financial loss, that's material, or to harm to the public, harm to a public sector institution, or even to misuse of a material public resource, then we can raise what's called a material irregularity. And MI is different from a normal audit finding in that we can see the direct link between, let's call it the breach and impact. Now we're also required to follow up. So we start by notifying the accounting officer, bring the issue to their notice, and calling for their urgent attention to it. And if they act in accordance with their powers in a manner that's appropriate and we deem adequate for that moment, we then allow them the space to continue to implement their plan of action. It's important that we do that because we do not step into their shoes. We don't take over the role of an accounting officer because they are the appointed steward over that institution. It's only if they fail to act that we can step in. And we step in by giving a stronger recommendation, which is then in the audit report, which is then the subject of engagement within the oversight mechanism. So within the portfolio committees, we will be engaging with parliamentarians on those stronger recommendations, which then provide for a much stronger tool, even for oversight, to drive accountability and corrective action. We can then, if that's failing, take binding remedial action. We can also refer a matter for investigation by others, such as those seized with public investigations and even law enforcement. I'm happy to report that over the course of having implemented these powers over the last 5 years, we've been able to identify a total of 292 material irregularities. And the process has led to us linking those MIs to a financial loss, combined financial loss of 14 billion rand. Out of that 14 billion rand, we've been able to get accounting officers to get back just over 3 billion rand, and that's just for the PFMA cycle over the last 5 years. Yes, we can celebrate that we've been able to protect resources of 3.39 billion rand. But there's a big jump between 14 billion rand and 3 billion rand. And the gap that sits between those two numbers is the behavior of accounting officers, who must ensure that they prevent these problems and they detect them and act on them much, much quickly. What we're seeing is that the source, the real root causes of these things are the same issues we raise in the course of our normal findings, which are paying for things we don't receive, procuring in a way that's ineffective, that's unfair, that's uncompetitive, and that's not in compliance with the law. Not ensuring that we receive value for what we are paying, not using the resources we have effectively. And these are all the responsibilities of the accounting officer as per the PFMA. Through these powers, we've been able to raise matters around the utilization or the underutilization of medical facilities. How this arises is that in the course of our audits, we'll see that the debits and credits are right. There's been a ward that's been invested in. And then we go, so we can tick the box. Debits and credits are fine. Financial statements are fine. But then we can go to see whether or not those assets are being used in the manner that they should be. And in a number of instances, we found that not to be the case. Whether it was that Witbank Hospital, where the neonatal ICU ward was not being used, even though there had been an investment 6 years before then. We were able to use the MI process to get the accounting officer to do what they should have been doing, which is to hire the staff that must now operate the ward and to bring the ward into use for the benefit of the public. Whether it was finding beds at George Mukhari Hospital, very expensive, high-quality ICU beds that were not being used, and we were able to then use the MI process to get those beds used, somewhat alleviating the long queues and the burden of waiting for beds by sick patients. We've also been able to use our powers to get public sector institutions to attend to matters such as not submitting financial statements, as we did in the context of NSFAS. We've also raised matters around the lack of attention to ICT, especially controls on risks to cybersecurity. At the government printing works, that worked quite well. For 2 years, they failed to submit their financial statements because they had suffered cybersecurity threats. And as a consequence, we raised our MI powers, we raised the MI, we notified the accounting officer, and out of that, the relevant controls were strengthened, and now they finally caught up with their submission of financial statements. Now, these are things that no one should wait for the AG to raise. And so I'm always at pains, Honorable Chairs, to say, yes, it's wonderful that the office can demonstrate this big impact, and I'm truly, truly proud of what my team is able to do. However, what saddens me is the lost opportunity that continues to prevail, and the need for us to worry about who is running these public institutions, in whose hands are we placing the institutions and the public resources, and to what extent are they up to the task? And up to the task in terms of being professionals who are competent, who are ethical, who will acquit themselves with conscientiousness, who will ensure that they apply discipline. We've had to use our powers to get accounting officers to discipline their own staff. And the key question we have to keep asking is, what is it about the culture that prevails in these institutions that allows for accounting officers to rather opt not to discipline staff until they're compelled to by an outsider such as the Auditor-General? Some of the other aspects we've been able to deliver as benefits of our MI powers relate to getting accounting officers to deal with weaknesses to either their scholar transport program or even to their school nutrition programs, and always trying to get them to understand how a weakness we identify relates to management practices that they need to put in place, practices which will deal with the issue we've identified, but hopefully, if they're strengthened, will prevent a recurrence. We've been able to also get people to attend to maintenance of existing infrastructure, but also improve the value of spend or the quality of spend on new projects. We've been able to use our powers to also refer matters to law enforcement. Some of the issues are being dealt with by the Hawks, by the SIU, by the Public Protector, and the National Treasury. So as I wrap up, our primary message to the 7th Administration and to the 7th Parliament is this: we've got to push back on the culture of no accountability and consequences. As Team AGSA, we'll continue to do our part. However, the moment we are in requires that everyone in the ecosystem be seized with this so that we change the culture. We've got to deal with the ineffective management of the resources we do have. And we've got to invest in much better planning, much better coordination, and disciplined execution of our programs and projects. And we believe that a key enabler to all of these things whether it's about worrying about the infrastructure programs or the modernization and integration of government IT systems. All of these things will be enabled if we do invest decisively and unrelentingly in the professionalization of our public institutions. We believe that it is professionals who will ensure that they get the skills that they require to work alongside them. It's professionals that will make sure that they apply consequences when things go wrong, that they strengthen controls in response to audit issues. It's professionals that will make sure that they appoint the right contractors and hold them accountable. It's also professionals that will manage what is increasingly a tight budget in the context of huge service delivery demands. It is professionals that will ensure that they coordinate their efforts towards much better spending. And we hope that you can continue to work with us as Team AGSA within the oversight mechanisms to support you in your efforts so that ultimately we do change the culture within public sector institutions. Thank you very much, Chairs. I will end my inputs at this point and allow space and time for questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much indeed, Ms. Maluleke, and we want to appreciate the presentation that you've submitted to us this afternoon, but also appreciate the work that you do as an individual, but also as an office. And I think that the large team that you lead all needs to take a bow at this stage for the consistently excellent work that has been happening in the Auditor-General's office over years. And you've spoken about culture. I think that you've developed an outstanding culture within the organization as well. From a personal point of view, I just want to appreciate the impact assessment that you've extended. So it goes beyond the debits and credits, and the fact of going out into the field and taking a look at the work that's happening there. And as committee chairs, honourable chairpersons, I think it's important that we acknowledge the fact that we are guided in our work tremendously by the work of the Auditor-General. The Auditor-General looks after the debits and credits, and also the laid down prescribed targets that departments should be pursuing, which is exactly what we should be investigating and having oversight of. So I do believe our work is complementary. We are symbiotic in our nature as chairpersons and as the Auditor-General, and I just want to celebrate that relationship and the cooperation that happens there. As Honourable Frolick mentioned in the introduction, for which I want to thank him, I do just want to point out we don't have a huge amount of time this afternoon, and it is important to note, Honourable Chairpersons, that the Auditor-General will be presenting to individual departments and unpacking the individual components for the relevant departments over the coming weeks and months. And you'll have an opportunity to drill down into specifics relating to the department over which you have oversight. But I don't want to stifle debate entirely, but noting the time constraints that we have, I do want to invite anyone who has any comment that they might like to make of a general nature that doesn't specifically relate to an individual portfolio. If there are any comments from chairpersons or questions for additional clarity that anyone would like to raise, I invite you now to raise your hands. I'm not seeing a sudden rush to the stage, but yeah, Auditor-General, Ms. Maluleke, it looks like your presentation was sufficiently comprehensive that it's given everyone something to chew on. And I'm sure as they cogitate over the contents over the coming weeks, they'll all be preparing questions for you in committee. So you need to perhaps prepare for that. But perhaps in closing, anything you'd like to add, and perhaps a response to my comments. If I can just ask you to make sure you're unmuted again, please, AG.
Okay, I think That's happened. Am I audible properly now without the echo? Thank you very much for your comments, and I want to thank the honourable chairs for the opportunity to share this report with you. The report is now available, and I'm sure that it'll become the subject of our engagements in the different portfolio committees. As you know, we will remain available to support you and also to get feedback from you on the areas that you will a lot more on, but also even on how our message is assisting you or not, and how we could tweak it so that we do contribute to our ability to function much more effectively. But thank you once again for the support. All of the honourable chairs, and it would be remiss of me to also not thank the executive and those that run public institutions, the accounting authorities, the accounting officers, for their support. We wouldn't be able to complete these audits nor this report without the support that we enjoy as the supreme audit institution of South Africa. Thank you very much, Honourable Chair.
AG, thank you for your time this afternoon. Thanks for the first snap. We really do appreciate the work that you do, and we appreciate the offer to engage in some dialogue and have interactions that will, of course, emphasize and improve the quality of work that we're doing and taking it forward. Honourable Chairs, that brings us to the end of this meeting. Special thanks to Honourable Frolik for his part and his role, but to all of you for the work that you continue to do in your committees, individually and as a group. We thank you from Mr. Frolik and myself. We thank you for your commitment, and I think the people of South Africa are you a debt of gratitude as well. Mr. Frolik, is there anything you'd like to add as we close?
No, thank you very much, Honourable Ryder. Suffice to say that we will now look forward from the side of the National Assembly for the committees to infuse and include these audit outcomes in their programs, and also support the work that the Auditor-General is doing when they go and do oversight visits to actually go and see where the money is spent. Do we get value for money? And is it a product that we can proudly say that it's something that the people deserve? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honourable Chairpersons. The meeting is adjourned.
Baie dankie.